What would you do if the only thing your father left you was a stretch of dead earth nobody wanted? No money, no house, no goodbye. Just 160 acres of cracked dirt and bitter brush so dry the folks in town called it the Barrens. They laughed when Adelaide Whitlock signed the papers. 25 years old, back from the east with empty hands, inheriting a piece of land that couldn't grow a weed. They felt sorry for her, some of them anyway. The rest just laughed. But here's what that town didn't know, what none of them could have guessed. Her father, a quiet man who spent his whole life drawing maps of things no one else could see, had left her one more thing. A heavy old trunk locked tight full of rolled-up papers tied with twine. And inside those papers was a secret that could turn dead land into the most valuable ground in the whole valley. A secret her father had been keeping for 20 years. A secret that would make every person who laughed at her go very, very quiet. She just didn't know it yet. So before we go any further, tell me where you're listening from tonight. And stay close, because what Adelaide found buried under that worthless dirt is going to surprise you. Let's begin. The stagecoach came into Redemption Creek under a white, punishing sun. Adelaide Whitlock stepped down onto the hard-packed street, and the dust settled on her shoulders like the town was already trying to bury her. People stared. Of course they did. They remembered her, the strange cartographer's girl, the one who left. Now she was back, 25 years old, a plain travel dress, gone gray at the hem, a single carpet bag in her hand that held everything she owned. Everything, which wasn't much. She had spent 10 years out east, 10 years chasing a teaching post in a green little town where the streets had names and the houses had paint. A life she had tried so hard to build, a life that never quite took root. And then the telegram came. 4 words, cold as a creek in January. Father passed. Effects held. That was it. That was how she learned her own father was gone. Not from a letter, not from a friend, from a clerk who charged by the word. She had read it 3 times, standing in the schoolhouse hallway, chalk dust still on her fingers, and she had felt nothing. That was the part that scared her. The nothing. Because a daughter is supposed to feel something, isn't she? Lawyer Hempstead's office sat above the mercantile. A small, stuffy room that smelled of dry paper and old tobacco. He was a thin man with skin like cured leather, the kind of skin this country gave to everyone who stayed long enough. He slid a folder across the desk. Wouldn't quite meet her eyes. Your father's will was simple, Miss Whitlock. She opened it. 1 deed. That was all. Section 23. 160 acres south of the dry wash. And underneath, in her father's spidery, careful hand, the name he had given it. The Barrens. She almost laughed. The Barrens. He had named his own land after its uselessness, like a man naming a sick child after the thing that would kill it. No water rights to speak of, Hempstead said. Not much for grazing. Truth be told, Miss Whitlock. He paused, cleared his throat. It's not worth a great deal. I gathered. There's also a trunk from his workshop. A trunk. She remembered the workshop. Oh, she remembered. Her father, back turned, hunched over a table buried in maps, the smell of ink and vellum so thick you could taste it. She was 15. She had asked him to come to the town social, just once, Just come with me. Just be a father for one evening." He had waved a hand without turning around. "The earth is speaking, Adelaide. You have to learn its language." That was his answer. "The earth is speaking," to a 15-year-old girl in her best dress holding the door. She had slammed it so hard the windows rattled, and the distance between them. It opened like a crack in dry ground, wider every year, too wide to cross by the time she packed her bag and left. Now he was in the ground, and the only thing left to cross that distance was a trunk full of paper. "There's one more matter," Hempstead said. Something in his voice made her look up. "What matter?" He shuffled papers he didn't need to shuffle. "Your father, he fell behind, on the taxes for the land." "How far behind?" 3 years. The room got very quiet. "There's a notice," he went on. "The county allows 90 days from the date of probate to settle the back taxes, or the land goes to public auction. 90 days. And if I can't pay, then it's sold to recover the debt." He folded his hands. "I'll be honest with you, Miss Whitlock. There's already a party interested. Has been for some time. He's offered to take the matter off your hands, quietly." "Who?" But she already knew, somehow, before he said it. "Cassius Thorne." She didn't know the name yet, but she would learn it. Lord, would she learn it. She walked out into the blinding street with the deed folded against her chest. The sun hit her like a hand. 90 days. To save a piece of land she didn't want, that nobody wanted, that her own father had named after death. It was the most absurd thing she had ever heard, and she was going to do it anyway. She didn't know why. That was the strange part. Standing there in the dust, she just knew. Henry Cole owned the livery stable. A big man, solid as the oak posts that held up his barn, and the only soul in that whole town who looked her straight in the eye. No pity in it. That was what undid her almost. The no pity. "Your father was a good man, Adelaide." His voice came out low, like gravel settling. "He just saw the world a little different than the rest of us." He helped her move the trunk. It was heavy, dark wood bound with brass gone green from sea air, a thing from a life her father had lived long before the desert ever got him. He set it down in a small, clean room behind the stable. "You'll stay here," he said. "Not a question. Long as you need. I can't pay you. Didn't ask you to." His wife came to the doorway then. Hattie Cole. A woman somewhere north of 60, gray hair, pinned tight hands red from a lifetime of work. She looked Adelaide up and down. Long and slow. Adelaide braced for it. The judgment, the pity, the whisper behind the hand. Instead, Hattie crossed the room, took both of Adelaide's hands in hers, held them. "You've got his eyes," Hattie said. "Lord help you, child, you've got his eyes." And then she was gone. Back to her kitchen, like she hadn't just cracked something open in Adelaide's chest. That night, under a kerosene lantern, Adelaide knelt and lifted the lid of the trunk. It didn't smell of the sea. It smelled of earth, of dust and dry pine and old paper. The smell of him, so sudden and so complete that she had to sit back on her heels and breathe. Inside, rolled parchments, dozens of them, tied with twine, stacked like cordwood. She lifted one out, untied it, unrolled it slow across the floorboards, and she frowned. Because it wasn't a map, Not a real one, not roads and towns and rivers. It was the valley. She could see that much, but rendered in strange soft colors. Faint blue lines traced across it, lines that followed no creek, no road, no thing she knew. At the bottom, in his elegant script, 2 words, Aqua Fretus. She didn't know the Latin, but underneath he had written it plain, the sleeping river. She stared at it a long time. A river in the desert. He had drawn a river where there was no water for 30 miles in any direction. So that was it. That was the truth of him at the end. Her father hadn't been a genius. He'd been a sad, lonely old man drawing rivers that weren't there. She rolled it back up, tied the twine, and she did not cry. She told herself that. Sitting there alone in a borrowed room with a dead man's dreams stacked all around her. She did not cry. She was lying. Morning came hot and bright. She walked to the general store with a short list folded in her pocket. The air inside was thick, coffee and leather and smoked bacon. A knot of men stood around the cold stove. Their talk fell dead the second she crossed the threshold, and she felt it, every eye. One man stood at the center of them. Big, loud, the kind of big that fills a room and dares it to complain. Silver on his belt buckle. A voice built to carry across 100 acres. Well now, he turned, looked her over like livestock. If it isn't little Adelaide Whitlock, all grown up. Cassius Thorne. My condolences, he said, dripping. About your father, strange fellow, kept to himself. Thank you, Mr. Thorne. Now listen. He took a step closer, dropped his voice to a rumble that the whole store could still hear. He wanted it that way. Out of respect for the man's memory, I'd be willing to take that parcel off your hands. Would you? The Barons! He said the name like it tasted bad. Can't grow a thing on it, but I'll give you $20 for the deed. Cash, today. A snicker, somewhere behind the stove. $20. For land the county would seize in 90 days. He wasn't offering charity. He was offering to be the vulture that got there first. But there was something else in his eyes. She caught it. Just a flicker. He wanted that land. A man, like Cassius Thorne, did not chase worthless dirt. He did not lower his voice and play kind for $20 and a sad orphan girl. There was something under his offer, something he wasn't saying, and the moment she saw it, she knew she'd never sell. It's not for sale, she said. The store went quiet. Thorne blinked. Then he threw his head back and laughed. A great booming thing that rattled the tins on the shelves. Not for sale. He wiped his eye. Girl, what in God's name do you plan to do with it? Raise Rock's farm dust. He turned to his audience. She'll be back in a week, begging me to take it. The men laughed with him, because that was what you did. You laughed with Cassius Thorne. Adelaide paid for her flour, her salt, her coffee. Each coin counted out slow and exact. Her face a still pond. She walked out into the sun, and the laughter followed her into the street. And right there, standing in the dust with her little sack of supplies, something in her changed. Her grief, her quiet, useless grief, it hardened into something with edges, something stubborn. She was going to keep that land. She was going to find out what her father saw. And every single man laughing behind that stove was going to choke on it. She didn't know how. She had 90 days and almost no money and a chest full of rivers that weren't there. But she knew she would. Henry saw her face when she came back, and he didn't say a word, just helped her load her supplies into a small, sturdy buckboard. Then he went to a back stall, led out an old mare, the color of dust, her coat marked by hard years, her eyes soft and steady and somehow knowing. "This is Dusty," Henry said. "She was your father's." Adelaide reached out. The mare pressed her nose into Adelaide's palm. Warm, trusting, like she'd been waiting. "He'd want you to have her. She's slow." Henry rubbed the mare's neck. "But she's sure-footed, and she knows that country better than any man alive." Then he said the thing Adelaide would remember a long time. He trusted her. And, from a man like Henry Cole, who trusted almost nothing, that walked on two legs, there was no higher word in the language. That afternoon she opened the trunk again, but this time she wasn't looking at a dead man's sad mistake. She was looking for a reason. She spread the maps across the floor. All of them. The whole room papered in her father's mind. And they were beautiful. One showed the rock beneath the valley, layered like a cake. Notes in the margin on something called porosity, permeability. Words she didn't know. Another charted the wind, the way it moved across the basin season to season. Another traced where the lightning struck, summer after summer, as if the sky kept a habit. This was not the work of a lonely fool. This was the work of a man who looked at a dead desert and saw a living thing, breathing, moving, keeping secrets, and everywhere, those faint blue lines, the sleeping river, threading across every map, connecting places that meant nothing on the surface. Her eyes kept going back to them. She found the map of Section 23. Her land, the barrens, and one blue line, thicker than the rest, ran straight beneath the center of the plot. She traced it with her finger. A whisper of an idea began to take shape. Foolish. Impossible. As foolish as it was hopeful. What if he wasn't drawing a dream? What if he was drawing a map? The next morning, she set out to see the land herself, the buckboard loaded, Dusty in the harness pulling slow and steady. The whole town watched her roll past. Most saw a fool on a fool's errand, a stubborn girl marching toward a defeat she was too proud to see coming. She passed the last building, a small adobe house with a shaded porch. An old man sat on the bench out front, ancient, a relic from before the town even had a name. A piece of cottonwood in one gnarled hand, a whittling knife in the other. They said he had known this country when the only maps were the stars. He didn't look up as she passed, but his voice came anyway, dry as leaves skittering over stone. Your father listened to the stone's memory. She slowed the mare. The old man kept his eyes on the wood shavings at his feet. You got his eyes, he said. See if you got his ears. She waited, for more, for sense, for anything, but he just kept whittling, like he'd already said too much. She had no answer, so she nodded at him and clicked her tongue and let Dusty carry her on. The road shrank as she rode. A wide, rutted track became a pair of faint lines in the dirt. The faint lines became nothing at all, and the land got harder, meaner. The sagebrush gave way to greasewood and thorny mesquite. The soil turned pale and cracked, shimmering under a sun that did not forgive. Thorn's voice rode along with her. Raise rocks. Farm dust. The sat on her chest like a stone. And then a memory came, unasked. She was 12. Her father had taken her out to a high ridge over the valley. He knelt, pressed his palm flat against a slab of granite. "And you feel it, Adelaide," his voice low, full of a rare, quiet joy. "The hum, the deep music, that's the planet, breathing." She had pressed her own hand to the rock. She had felt nothing, warm stone, that was all, and she had rolled her eyes. 12 years old and so sure he was just a strange man saying strange things. She had wanted to go back to town, to her friends, to anywhere he wasn't. Now, riding alone, through the silence, he had loved the memory. Ached like a bruise she kept pressing. She had spent her whole life refusing to listen. And now, there was nobody left to listen to. Late in the afternoon, she heard hoofbeats behind her. Fast, closing, Thorn, on a black stallion that ate the ground in long, hungry strides. He reined in beside her plodding little wagon. The contrast was cruel, and he knew it. He tipped his hat, theatrical, mocking. "Enjoying your kingdom, Miss Whitlock?" She kept her eyes between the mare's twitching ears. "Find any gold nuggets out here?" Nothing. She gave him nothing, and her silence seemed to amuse him more than any answer could have. "Don't get too lost in your thoughts." His voice cooled. The smirk thinned. "This land has a way of swallowing folks who don't respect it." He gestured vaguely ahead. "And this peace has no respect for anyone." Then he spurred the stallion and tore off toward the horizon. A cloud of dust swallowed her whole. She sat in it, coughing, gritty film on her face, her lips, her teeth, and she squared her jaw, and she clicked her tongue. And the old mare carried her forward. An hour later, as the sun began its long fall, she saw it, a single, weathered post, driven into the cracked earth, and carved into it by a hand she knew. 2 letters. E.W. Ezra Whitlock. She had arrived. The sight of the land hit her like a fist. It was worse than she had pictured. Worse than the town's meanest words. A picture of pure desolation, the ground a mosaic of deep sun-baked cracks, parched skin stretched over bones, a scatter of skeletal bushes, gray bitterbrush defeated, and in the center a small cabin, sagging, its roofline bowed like it was tired of holding itself up. The door hung from a single leather hinge, swinging in the hot breath of the wind. This was her inheritance, a monument to failure. For a long moment she just sat there, reins limp in her hands, and the thought came, loud and reasonable. Turn around, ride back, hand Thorn the deed for his insulting $20, and go. Anywhere. The whole thing was madness. The town was right. Thorn was right. Her father had been a dreamer who mistook a wasteland for a canvas. But then, Dusty, who had stood patient through all of it, let out a long, slow sigh, a weary, accepting sound, and the old mare lowered her head and began to nibble at a dry stalk of grass. Just like that. Survival. The plain, stubborn act of staying alive in a place that wanted you dead. And something in Adelaide answered it. She would stay. One night. Just one. She told herself it didn't mean anything, and she knew even as she thought it, that this was one more thing she didn't believe. She unhitched the mare, led her to a patch of less hostile ground. set out a small measure of oats and a bucket of water she'd hauled all the way from town. Every drop of it precious as silver out here. She made her own camp by the wagon, not yet ready to set foot in that ruined cabin, and as the sun dipped below the far mountains, the desert changed. The brutal flat light of midday went soft. Orange, rose, deep violet bleeding across the sky. The crushing heat lifted into a cool, clean air. And that silence she had felt all day, the empty, terrible silence. It changed too. It filled with something, a vast, watchful presence. The stars came out, not faint specks, a teeming river of light arching across pure black velvet. She built a small fire from dead mesquite, a single point of human warmth in all that dark. She ate bread and jerky, and she spread her father's maps on the blanket beside her, their blue lines glowing soft in the firelight. Then she lay down in the wagon bed, wrapped in a blanket, and she looked up at that ocean of stars, and, for the first time, the anger and the regret made room for something else, something quiet. Maybe he hadn't been running from the world. Maybe he had been reaching for something deeper, something truer, something she had been too young and too angry to see. "I'm here," she whispered, "to the dark, to the stars, to him. I came back. I'm sorry it took me so long." The fire popped. The mare shifted in the dark. And that night, Adelaide dreamed of water, not a river she could see, not a lake. The sound of it, a low, deep hum running far, far underground, a vibration she could feel in her own bones. She woke with a start, just before dawn. The world hung in that strange, suspended moment between night and day. Soft gray light, the air dead still. She sat up, a prickle of unease crawling along her arms. Something was wrong. She looked for Dusty, expected to find her tethered near the wagon. Gone. Panic shot through her. She scrambled up, and then she saw her. The mare stood stock still, dead center of the property. Head down, body rigid. She wasn't grazing. She wasn't sleeping. She looked, for all the world, like she was listening to the silent, sleeping earth beneath her hooves. Adelaide slipped out of the wagon, bare feet silent on the cool ground, heart thumping against her ribs. She walked toward the mare, slow. Dusty didn't move, didn't flick an ear at her. Her whole being aimed straight down, into the ground. Adelaide stopped beside her, followed her gaze. The dirt looked like any other dirt. Flat, cracked, pale. She knelt, held her hand just above the surface, feeling for something, heat, a vibration, anything, nothing. She almost stood, almost laughed at herself for chasing a mare's strange mood across the desert at dawn. And then the first true rays of the rising sun sliced across the land. Low, flat, golden. The light caught every imperfection in the ground and threw it into sharp relief. And she saw it. Not the big obvious cracks. Something else. A network of incredibly fine lines, no wider than a thread, radiating out from a single point, right beneath Dusty's hooves. A pattern, delicate, deliberate, like the veins of a leaf, like the inside of a snowflake. Order, perfect, intricate order, in a place that was nothing but chaos. Adelaide's breath caught in her throat. She turned and ran for the cabin. crashed through that sagging door without a thought, grabbed the maps from her bag with shaking hands. She found the master map, the one with the blue lines. She found section 23, her plot, and there, right where the mare had stood, right where the threads of crack all came together, several of those faint blue lines converged into a single, darker node, exactly where she was standing, exactly where her father had marked 20 years ago. In his careful hand the words she finally let herself believe. The sleeping river. She sat back hard in the dust. It wasn't proof. She knew that. It was a ghost of a thing, built on an old mare's intuition and a dead man's drawings. But she looked out at that broken, brutal land. The land they all laughed at. The land her father had named for death, and, for the very first time, she didn't see a wasteland. She saw a secret. She saw a river, sleeping right beneath her feet, waiting 20 years for someone to learn how to listen. She had 90 days, 89 now, and she had a shovel in that cabin somewhere. She got to her feet, wiped the grit from her hands, and she looked down at the patient old mare who had carried her father's last secret in her bones all this time. "All right," Adelaide said, soft, almost a laugh, almost a sob. "All right, I'm listening." The sun cleared the mountains, and the whole dead valley caught fire with the morning, and somewhere down in the dark, far below the cracked and thirsty earth, the river slept on, waiting for her. The work began the next morning, and the work was brutal. Adelaide started with the cabin, not because she had to, because she needed to claim the place, to put one small mark of order on all that desolation, to say with her own two hands, "I am staying." She pried the rusted nails from the collapsed roof, salvaged the planks, rehung the door so it shut, swept out years of dust and mouse droppings and the ghosts of a man who'd lived alone too long. Her hands cracked, then bled, then healed into something harder, and every other day she made the trip to the brackish seep, a half-day's journey each way, dusty, plodding, patient under the sun. She came back with 2 barrels of water, so mineral-heavy it barely passed for drinking. It was exhausting, a slow, draining reminder of the one thing this land had decided to withhold. Water, the very thing she was now certain slept beneath her feet, and she couldn't reach a drop of it. The irony was not lost on her, hauling foul water 20 miles, to stand on top of an ocean she couldn't touch. In the evening she studied her father's journal. His handwriting was a fortress, cramped, technical, full of words she didn't know. She read by lantern light until her eyes burned a dictionary she'd borrowed from Hattie open beside her. Porosity, permeability, artesian, aquifer, slowly, word by word. The fortress began to open. I hadn't been drawing what he saw on the surface. He had been reading what lay beneath it. The blue lines weren't poetry. They were fracture zones, ancient faults in the bedrock, the deep grammar of the stone. Old Eben's riddle came back to her. He listened to the stone's memory, and she finally understood. The old man hadn't been talking nonsense. He'd been telling her the truth, in the only language he had left. Then, one evening, she turned a page in the journal, and her blood went cold. A cross-section sketch, the valley sliced open like a loaf of bread, and there, Deep below section 23, a great curved formation her father had labeled, in careful block letters, the capstone, and, beside it, a passage she read 3 times before she let herself believe it. Where the breath of the deep earth surfaces, a natural artesian seal, pressure held by 10,000 years of patience, lift the stone, wake the river. She sat very still in the lantern light. Lift the stone. He had told her exactly what to do. A dead man, reaching across the grave, through 20 years of silence, to hand his daughter the one thing he never gave her while he lived, a way forward. She slept maybe 2 hours that night, and at first light she took the pickaxe from the cabin wall, the handle worn smooth by his hands, the metal pitted with rust. She walked to the center of the plot, to the place where the threads of crack converged, where the mare had stood and listened. She raised the pickaxe over her head, and she swung. The ground was iron. The point bounced off the baked clay, and the shock of it rang up her arms and into her teeth. She'd chipped out a handful of dirt, the size of a biscuit. She looked at the hole, then at the vast hard earth around it, and she laughed, out loud, alone in the desert, because the whole thing was so absurd. One woman, one rusty pickaxe, against 10,000 years of stone. Then she stopped laughing, spit in her palms, and swung again. Hours turned into days. The town heard about it. Of course it did. Word traveled on the backs of passing riders, and the story that came back was uglier than before. The Willock girl had lost her mind, out in the barrens, digging a hole in the dead center of nothing. Digging, some said, her own grave. Under the mad desert sun, the pity got sharper, meaner. But Adelaide didn't hear it. The only sounds in her world were the wind, the cry of a distant hawk, and the steady clang of iron biting earth. Until one afternoon, a different sound, a wagon, coming up the faint track from town. She straightened, wiped the sweat from her eyes, her hand drifting toward the shovel, because the only person who'd ridden out here so far was Cassius Thorne. But it wasn't him. It was Hattie Cole. The old woman climbed down off the buckboard with the careful stiffness of 60-odd years. She looked at the hole, at the blistered, filthy young woman standing in it, at the rusty tools and the cracked hands and the wild, determined eyes. And Hattie did not say, "You've lost your mind." She did not say, "Come home, child." She reached into the back of the wagon, pulled out a covered basket and a bundle of clean cloth. "Brought you some biscuits," Hattie said, "and bandages for those hands, which I can see from here are a disgrace." Adelaide opened her mouth, to explain, to defend, to say something, and nothing came out, except a sound she hadn't made in years. She started to cry, not delicate, not pretty, great heaving sobs that bent her over the pickaxe handle. Days of it, weeks of it, 10 years of it, all of it coming out at once in the middle of a hole in the desert. Hattie didn't fuss, didn't coo. She just climbed down into that hole in her good dress, put her arms around Adelaide, and held on. "There now," she said. "There now." And that was all. When the storm passed, Hattie sat her down on the wagon gate and unwrapped the basket and bound her ruined hands, slow and gentle, the way a mother does. "My Henry says your father trusted that mare," Hattie said, nodding at Dusty. "And Henry don't trust easy." So I figure your father knew something. She tied off the bandage. And I figure you do too, even if you can't say it yet. Adelaide stared at her. Everyone thinks I'm crazy. Everyone thought your father was crazy too. Hattie patted her knee. Lot of crazy folk turn out to be the only ones seeing straight. She stood, brushed off her skirt. I'll come every few days, bring you proper food. You'll eat it. Not a question. And you'll keep digging, whatever it is you're digging for. She climbed back up onto the buckboard, took the reins. Then she paused, looked down at Adelaide one more time. You're not alone out here, child, she said. I want you to know that. Whatever this town says, you are not alone. And she clicked her tongue and drove away. A small gray figure shrinking into the heat. Adelaide stood there, bandaged hands, wet face. Not alone. She hadn't known how badly she needed to hear it, until she heard it. She picked up the pickaxe, and she kept digging. Days later, late afternoon, the light going gold. She raised the pickaxe, brought it down, and the sound changed. Not the dull thud of metal into dirt. A sharp ringing clang, a sound that shivered up the handle and into her bones. A sound with a strange, promising hollowness to it. She froze. Then she dropped to her knees and scraped at the dirt with her bare, bandaged hands like a dog. Stone. She'd hit stone, but not just any stone. She cleared a patch the size of a dinner plate, and there it was, pale sandstone, smooth, and scored across its surface with the same fine network of hairline cracks she'd seen on the ground that first morning. The capstone. Her father's word made real, right under her hands. She traded the pickaxe for the shovel and worked until full dark, and the next day, and the next. Slowly the slab emerged, vast, flat, easily 8 feet across. A smooth, shallow depression worn into its center like a basin shaped by water that hadn't moved in 10,000 years. It was exactly as he had drawn it. Every line, every measurement. The man had stood here 20 years ago and seen a thing buried under the earth, and drawn it, from the inside, like he could see through dirt. She pressed her palm flat against the cool stone, and, for one strange moment, she swore she felt it. A hum, a deep, distant music, rising up through the rock, the planet, breathing. I feel it, Papa, she whispered. 13 years too late. I finally feel it. But she didn't tell anyone. Not yet. Not even Hattie. Because the thing was too big, too fragile. A theory and a slab of rock and a dead man's faith. She wasn't ready to hand it to the world. Not until she was sure. What she didn't know was that the world had already noticed her. Because, while she dug, Cassius Thorne had been watching. Not him. His men, riding the high ground at the edge of her plot, spyglasses catching the sun, reporting back what they saw, and what they saw worried him. A woman who would not quit, a woman digging toward something, with the steady, certain hands of someone who knew exactly where to dig. Thorne hadn't offered $20 out of pity, and he hadn't lowered his price out of kindness. He had wanted that land for one reason, a reason he had kept buried longer than the river itself. He knew, somehow, he knew what was under there, and he could not let her find it first. So he made his move. It came on a hauling day. Adelaide drove the empty barrels out to the brackish seep, dusty, plodding through the heat. Half a day each way. her one reliable source of water in all the world, except when she came over the last rise. The seep was gone, not dry, gone. A great mound of fresh-turned earth and stone sat where the water had pooled. Someone had filled it in, buried it. Boulders dragged across it, the mud around it churned by the hooves of a dozen horses. She climbed down, stood at the edge of the ruined seep, and in the soft mud she saw the fresh prints. A whole crew, recent, and cut deep into the bank where someone had idled their mount and watched the work get done. A single set of prints from a horse with one chipped shoe. She'd seen that print before, in the dust outside her own cabin. The morning after Thorn rode out to mock her, her blood went hot and then very, very cold. He'd cut her water, not to kill her. He wasn't that stupid. To break her, to grind her down, to run her dry before the 90 days ran out. So she'd come crawling back to town, sign the deed, take his money and his train ticket and leave. He was going to win by simply waiting for her to die of thirst on top of a hidden ocean. She stood there a long time. 2 empty barrels in the wagon. The nearest other water, a full day away. Her whole brutal margin of survival, erased in an afternoon by a man who already had everything. And here is the thing about Adelaide Whitlock that Cassius Thorn did not understand. You could take her water, you could take her comfort, you could take her dignity in front of a store full of laughing men. But every single thing you took, she used to dig faster. She turned the wagon around, drove the long way to the far well, came back at midnight half dead with exhaustion, and at first light, she picked up the iron bar, and she went to wake the river. The capstone would not move. She wedged the long iron bar into a fissure at the slab's edge, threw her whole weight against it. Nothing. The stone was the planet's own bone. It had no interest in 110 pounds of stubborn woman. She tried again, grunting, straining, sweat stinging her eyes, the bar groaning. Nothing. She slumped against the rock, spent, so close, after all of it, after everything. Stopped by a stone she could not lift. Dusty stood at the edge of the pit, watching her with those soft, knowing eyes. And Adelaide looked at the mare. And she thought of leverage, and rope, and a 1,000-pound animal who knew how to pull. It took her the rest of the day to rig it. Rope to the iron bar. Bar braced against a smaller boulder for a fulcrum. The other end of the rope to Dusty's harness. "Easy, girl," she breathed, taking the lead. "Easy now. Together." She clicked her tongue. The mare leaned into the harness. The rope went taut. The bar bit down. And the stone groaned, a deep, grinding sound. Like the earth itself clearing its throat, the slab shifted, an inch, just an inch, and a puff of cool, damp, ancient air washed up over Adelaide's face. The smell of wet stone and undisturbed dark, the breath of the deep earth. Exactly as he had written. She wept, and she laughed, and she clicked her tongue again. "Again, girl. Again." Inch by inch through the long afternoon, they widened the gap, woman and mare, until a dark circular opening yawned in the desert floor, 3 feet across. Her hands shook so badly she could barely strike the match. She tied the lantern to a length of rope, lit it, and lowered it slow into the dark. The flame went down, lit rough-hewn stone walls, down 10 feet, 20, and then the light stopped catching on stone. It caught on something else, something that shimmered and moved, and threw the lantern light back up at her in dancing fragments. Water, a pool of it, so clear the flame seemed to reach all the way to the bottom. Adelaide knelt at the lip of the opening, stared down into the dark heart of her father's dream. The blue lines were not rivers on a map. They were the veins of a living aquifer, a vast, slow river moving through the bones of the earth. And this exact spot, was the place it could be reached. He had not left her barren land. He had left her the source, the heart, the very thing the whole dying valley had been thirsting for longer than anyone could remember. The tears came, carving clean tracks through the grime on her cheeks. And they were not sorrow, they were not loneliness. They were a daughter, finally, completely, knowing her father. "You weren't crazy," she whispered into the cool, rising dark. "You were just early." She lowered a bucket, drew up water, cupped it in her ruined hands and drank. Cold, clear, sweet, none of the brackish bite of the seep. The purest water she had ever tasted in her life. She built a low stone wall around the opening over the next days, a proper wellhead, each stone set in place like a prayer. She rigged a pulley and a bucket, and the dead center of the barrens became quietly the only living thing for 30 miles. And then, cleaning out the inside lip of the shaft, her fingers found something carved into the stone, just below the rim, where no one would ever see it unless they were down inside the well itself. Letters. She brushed the dirt away, held the lantern close. 2 sets of initials, EW, and beside them, worn but clear, cut by a different hand, SP Ezra Whitlock, and someone else, SP. Her father had not found this place alone. 20 years ago, there had been 2 of them, a partner, a name she did not know, a secret, inside the secret. And as she crouched there in the dark lantern, trembling in her hand, staring at a stranger's initials carved beside her father's, the wind above her began to change. She climbed out of the well, and she looked west. The brilliant, cloudless blue was gone. In its place, a sickly yellow-brown haze sat low on the horizon, spreading, climbing. The air had gone dead still and heavy, charged, the kind of stillness that comes right before the world decides to break. She had grown up in this country. She knew that color, a duster, not a common whirlwind, a true storm. A rolling wall of sand and wind that could strip the paint off a wagon and scour the soul right out of a person. And it was coming. Fast. Adelaide ran, hauled the barrels into the cabin, drove Dusty in after them. The little cabin that had been a ruin and was now somehow a fortress. She barred the mended door, shuttered the one small window, just as the first gust hit. A physical blow. The whole structure groaned around her, and the world outside dissolved into a screaming, roaring wall of brown. Day became a suffocating twilight. Sand fine as flour found every crack, coated everything, her hair, her lips, the maps, the lantern light. She huddled against Dusty's warm flank in the dark, and she thought of the initials carved in the stone, SP, and she thought of the river, and she thought of Hattie, saying, "You are not alone." and then, through the howl of the wind, she heard a sound that did not belong, a human voice, a shout, torn nearly to nothing by the gale, but unmistakable. Someone was out there. Someone was out there, in the storm, dying. She pressed her eye to the crack in the shutter, and through the swirling brown, not 50 yards off, she saw a dark shape, an overturned wagon, and huddled against it trying to shield themselves from the sandblast small shapes. People, a family, out there, in the heart of it, with no shelter and no water and no chance. Adelaide pulled back from the shutter, her heart hammering. She had a choice to make, and she had about 4 seconds to make it. Out there was the storm, the screaming, blinding, killing storm, and a family of strangers she did not know. And in here was warmth and safety, and the one secret in all the world she had bled for, the well, the river, the thing that could save her and damn her in the very same breath. Because the moment she opened that door, the moment she shared that water, the secret would no longer be hers alone. She thought of her father, alone out here for 20 years, guarding his maps, his river, his silence, and she thought of how that ended. A man, so alone that his own daughter learned of his death from a clerk. Adelaide Whitlock wrapped a scarf around her face. She took a deep breath, and she lifted the bar from the door. The wind tore the door from her hands and slammed it against the wall. Adelaide leaned into the gale, each step a war. The sand came at her sideways, stinging every inch of bare skin, and the world was nothing but a screaming wall of brown. 50 yards. It felt like 50 miles. She found them by the sound, by the children crying, a man, a woman, 2 small ones clinging to her skirts, pressed against the overturned wagon, like the wood could save them. "Come with me!" She had to scream it into the man's ear. "I have shelter. Come now." He stared at her, a stranger appearing out of the storm like a ghost. Now, she grabbed the smallest child. The man scooped up the other, and they ran, blind, stumbling, Adelaide ahead, the faint glow of her cabin lantern, the only star in all that howling dark. They fell through the doorway, all of them, coughing, half blind, and she threw her whole weight against the door and dropped the bar. The storm raged on outside, but inside, they were alive. They were the Hales, Marcus and Ruth, and 2 little girls, Bess and June, headed west to a brother's place in the territory, caught on the open flat when the duster rose. Their horses had bolted, their water was gone, their canteens bone dry, and the storm. Ruth said, holding her girls close. The storm could last for days. Adelaide looked at the 4 of them, at the 2 empty barrels in the corner, at the little she had left, and then she looked at the door, beyond which lay the well, her father's river, the secret she had bled for and lied for and guarded like her own beating heart. She thought about it for exactly as long as it took to look at June, the smallest one, lips already cracking, eyes too big in a small dusty face. That was all the thinking she needed. "I'll be back," she said. "Stay here. You can't go out there." Ruth caught her arm. "You'll die." "I won't." Adelaide pried her fingers loose, gentle. "I know exactly where I'm going." She wrapped the scarf back over her face, took the bucket, and went out into the screaming dark, to the well. She shielded the opening with her own body, and lowered the bucket, and drew up water clear and cold and impossible in the middle of a storm that wanted them all dead. She carried it back, sloshing, precious. The Hales drank, and the look on their faces. Adelaide would remember it, the rest of her life. It was not just relief, it was disbelief. Where does water like this come from? Out here, in the dead heart of nothing. It's a miracle, Marcus whispered. Adelaide shook her head. Slow. No, she said. It's just listening. For 2 days the storm howled, and 5 people and 1 old mare sheltered in a cabin that should have been a ruin, warmed by a small fire. Safe. The little girls fell asleep against Adelaide's side, and she sat very still so as not to wake them. And she thought, this is the most company this cabin has ever held. In 20 years, maybe ever. Her father had filled it with maps. She had filled it with people. She wasn't sure when she decided that meant something. But she decided it. On the 3rd morning, silence. The storm had blown itself out. Adelaide opened the door onto a world remade. The sky a freshly washed blue. The air clean and sharp. The land softened under a new blanket of pale sand. They found the Hale wagon, half buried but whole. Righted it together, dug out what they could. And before they set off toward the distant smudge of Redemption Creek, Marcus Hale took Adelaide's hand, pressed something into it, a gold coin, worn smooth. For the water, he said. She tried to give it back. He folded her fingers over it. You didn't just give us water, ma'am. His voice broke. You gave us back our lives. There's no coin for that. But take it anyway. And they rolled off into the morning, the 2 little girls waving until the wagon was a speck on the horizon. Adelaide stood in her doorway, a gold coin in her palm, and no idea that those 4 strangers were about to change everything, because the Hales reached town by nightfall, and they talked. But the story they told was not the one the town expected. It was not the tale of the crazy Whitlock girl digging her own grave. It was the story of a woman, brave and quiet and kind, who walked into a killing storm to save 4 strangers, who pulled the purest, sweetest water anyone had ever tasted out of the dead center of the barrens. The barrens, where there was no water, where there had never been water. The snickers died in the throats of the men around the stove, and in the saloon. Cassius Thorne heard it too. He did not laugh. He did not make a single booming remark. He set down his glass, and the color drained out of his face. And he stood up so fast his chair went over backward. Because Cassius Thorne knew exactly what it meant if there was water under that land. He'd known for 20 years. He was on his black stallion before the sun came up. He found her at the wellhead, resetting a few stones the storm had loosened. He saw the mended cabin that was a home now and not a ruin. He saw the green, the first impossible patch of green where she'd let the overflow run. And he saw the bucket beside her, full of clear, cold water. He swung down off the horse, stiff, like every joint in his body had locked. They say you've got water, he said, flat. Adelaide said nothing. She dipped a tin cup into the bucket and held it out to him. He took it. His eyes never left hers. He drank. a long, deep swallow, and when he lowered the cup. The arrogance was gone from his face, washed clean away, and what was left underneath was something close to fear. "I'll buy it," he said. "Low now. Urgent. $500. Cash. Right now. Today." She took the cup back from his hand. "It's not for sale, Mr. Thorne." Something flickered behind his eyes, and then it hardened. "You don't understand what you've got, girl." "I understand exactly what I've got." She set the cup on the wall. "I think the question is how long you've understood it." He went very still. "You knew," she said, quiet, certain. "All this time, you didn't want this land because it was worthless. You wanted it because it isn't. You've known there was water under here for years." Thorne's jaw worked. He said nothing, which was answer enough. "Get off my land," Adelaide said. He mounted his horse. But at the edge of the plot he reined in, turned back, and the smile that crossed his face was the coldest thing she'd seen since she came home. "Enjoy it while you can, Miss Whitlock," he called. "You're still 3 years behind on the taxes, and the clock is still running." He tipped his hat. "I'll see you at auction." And he rode off, and Adelaide stood there, and the cold truth settled over her like the dust after his horse. She had found the water, and she was still about to lose everything. 40 days gone, 50 left. She rode into town that afternoon, walked straight to Hempstead's office, slapped the Hale family's gold coin on his desk. "How much?" she said. He looked at the coin, looked at her, and shook his head slow and sorry. "Miss Whitlock, the back taxes come to better than $200, with the penalties." He pushed the coin back toward her. "This won't touch it. $200. She didn't have $2. She had a river, and no way to turn it into coin before the clock ran out. And worse, far worse." As she stood there, Hempstead lowered his voice and told her the thing that turned her stomach to ice. Cassius Thorne had filed a petition with the county, a claim, arguing that since the original water rights had passed through his family's grant 50 years back, any water discovered on the adjoining parcel belonged, by rights, to him. It was a lie, a twisted, lawyered-up lie. But Thorne had money, and Thorne had a lawyer, and the territorial court had agreed to hear it. A hearing, to decide who owned the sleeping river, and it would fall just days before the tax deadline. So even if she fought the claim and won the auction, would be breathing down her neck. "You'll need proof, Miss Whitlock," Hempstead said. "Real proof that the water and the discovery are yours, or his lawyer will eat you alive. Proof." She rode home in the dark, hollowed out, and she lay awake, staring at the cabin ceiling, and she thought of the initials carved in the well. E.W. and S.P. a partner, a second name, if her father hadn't found that river alone. Then somewhere out there was a man who could tell the truth of how it was found, and when, and by whom. She didn't know who S.P. was, but she knew one man old enough to remember everything that had ever happened in this valley. At dawn, she rode to the little adobe house at the edge of town. Old Eben sat on his bench, whittling like he had never once moved in 25 years. She got down off the mare, and she didn't waste words. "There were 2 of them," she said. 2 men who found the water, my father, and someone with the initials S.P. She stepped closer. "You knew my father. You know everyone. So I'm going to ask you straight. Who is SP? The old man's knife went still. For a long moment he didn't speak. He looked at the wood shavings at his feet, and when he finally raised his head, his eyes were wet. You've got his ears now, Eben said softly. I told you. See if you got his ears. He set down the knife. And you did. Who is he? He's me. Adelaide's breath stopped. Silas Penn, the old man said. Before this town gave me a new name and a bench to die on. Silas Penn. Your father and I, we mapped this whole valley together. 40 years ago, two young fools who thought we could read the bones of the earth. He held up his gnarled hands, looked at them. We found the river, both of us. The maps, half of them are in my hand. We were going to bring water to this whole dying country, together. What happened? The old man's face went hard with a grief 40 years deep. Cassius Thorne's father happened, and the story came out. Slow and terrible. 40 years ago, the elder Thorne had gotten wind of what the two mapmakers were close to finding, and he wanted it. So he forged a claim, bribed a clerk, produced false papers saying the survey work, the maps, the discovery, all of it belonged to him. And then he ran Silas Penn out, ruined his name, called him a thief and a madman, until no one in the valley would speak to him. Your father fought it, Eben said. Fought it till it nearly killed him. But the Thornes had the money and the lawyers and the law in their pocket. In the end, all he could do was take the maps, hide them, and wait. The old man's voice cracked. He told me, the last time we spoke, he said, Silas, I can't beat them. But maybe my girl can, someday, if she ever comes home. Adelaide sank down onto the bench beside him. Her whole life, she had thought her father chose his maps over her, chose the silence, chose the desert, and the truth was, he had been guarding something, for her, for a daughter he hoped would someday come home and finish what two young men started 40 years before. The earth is speaking, Adelaide. You have to learn its language. He hadn't been pushing her away. He had been trying to teach her, to survive what was coming. The forged papers, she said, her voice barely there. The ones the Thornes used, do they still exist? Eben looked at her, and something old and fierce woke up in his eyes. They do, he said, and I know a man who can prove they're forged. A surveyor from the territorial capital. An honest one, name of Calloway. He owed your father a debt once. The old man stood, slow, tall, taller than she'd ever seen him. It's a long ride to send for him. 4 days at the least, and not much time before that hearing, so we send word today, right now. Then we'd better start writing, Adelaide said. She sent the telegram that very afternoon. Calloway, territorial capital, come at once. A matter of fraud and water and a dead man's name. And then she waited, and dug, and prayed. The day of the hearing came hot and bright, with the tax deadline just 3 days behind it. So close she could feel it on the back of her neck. The county courthouse in the territorial seat was packed. Word had spread. The whole valley wanted to see it. The crazy Whitlock girl against Cassius Thorne. For a river under the desert. Thorne sat at the front in a fine coat. his lawyer beside him, a sleek city man with a leather case full of papers, and the smile on Thorne's face said he had already won. Adelaide sat alone at the other table, in her one good dress, her father's maps in a trunk at her feet. Behind her, Hattie and Henry Cole, the Hale family who had ridden 2 days back to stand with her, and in the last row leaning on a cane, he didn't need old Silas Penn. Thorne's lawyer went first, smooth as oil. He laid out the forged claim like scripture. The Thorne family grant, the water rights, the adjoining parcel. He produced the old yellowed papers, 50 years old, official seals, everything in order. The water, he concluded, belongs to my client, as it has by law for half a century. The judge looked at Adelaide. Miss Whitlock, have you anything to counter this? Her heart pounded. She stood, opened the trunk, and began to bring out the maps. She laid them across the table. The strata, the fracture zones, the blue lines, the sleeping river, the capstone drawn from the inside 20 years before she ever lifted it. My father made these, she said, her voice shaking and then steadying. Ezra Whitlock. He understood this water before any Thorne ever dreamed of it, and he didn't make them alone. The lawyer smirked. A dead man's drawings prove nothing, Your Honor. Anyone can draw lines on paper. That's true, Adelaide said, so I won't ask you to take a dead man's word. She turned toward the door. I'll ask you to take an honest man's. And the courthouse door swung open. Surveyor Calloway walked in, travel-stained, spectacles fogged, a leather satchel under his arm. He had ridden 4 days without rest. He took the stand, and he was quiet and precise and impossible to rattle. He had examined the maps. He testified that they were decades ahead of their time, the work of a true hydrologist of genius, that no man could have drawn them without standing on that land and understanding its deepest structure, that they predated the Thorne claim by years. And then he opened his satchel and produced the original survey records from the Territorial Archive, the real ones. The Thorne family grant, Calloway said, holding up the old yellowed paper, was altered. The water rights were added later, in a different ink, by a different hand, years after the original filing. He looked straight at Cassius Thorne. This document is a forgery, and it always was. The courtroom erupted. Thorne shot to his feet, his face purple. That's a lie. That paper has been in my family for 50 years. It has. Calloway agreed. 50 years of holding a stolen claim. I have the original, filed by 2 men, Ezra Whitlock and Silas Penn. And in the last row, the old man rose, slow, on a cane he didn't need, and the whole courtroom turned to look at the town madman they'd pitied and ignored for 40 years. My name, he said, and his dry voice carried to every corner of that room, is Silas Penn, and Cassius Thorne's father stole my life, my name, and my friend's good name along with it. He looked at Adelaide, but he couldn't steal the truth, because the truth was sleeping, right under all our feet, waiting. The judge's gavel came down like thunder. It was over in an hour. The forged claim, thrown out, the water and the land, ruled beyond all doubt to belong to Adelaide Whitlock and the heirs of Silas Penn. and the matter of the elder Thorne's fraud, referred to the territorial attorney. Cassius Thorne walked out of that courthouse, a smaller man than he had walked in, the whole valley watching, the booming voice silent at last. But there was still the matter of the taxes. Adelaide had won the river and was about to lose the land for $200 she did not have. The auction was 3 days off, and no court ruling could stop the county from selling for a debt. She stood on the courthouse steps, the victory turning to ash in her mouth, and then Hattie Cole stepped up beside her and pressed a heavy cloth bag into her hands. It clinked. "What is this?" Adelaide whispered. "That," said Hattie, "is the town." Adelaide opened it. Coins, crumpled bills, a child's penny, a rancher's silver dollar. "Word got around," Hattie said, her old eyes shining, "about the storm, about the hails, about a girl who walked into a duster for strangers and gave water to anyone who came thirsty and asked for nothing back." She closed Adelaide's fingers over the bag. "Folks who laughed at you, they passed the hat, child, every one of them, to pay your taxes." Adelaide looked up, and there, on the courthouse lawn, stood half the town, the men from around the stove, the ranchers, the store clerk, Mrs. Hale and her 2 little girls, all of them, hats in their hands, waiting to say they were sorry, in the only language a hard country knew. She paid the taxes that very afternoon, $211, and there were $6 left over, which she gave to Silas Penn for a new whittling knife. And he laughed. For the first time in 40 years, a season turned, and the land began to answer. Where Adelaide let the overflow run a patch of impossible green, spread across the cracked earth. A garden, then wildflowers no one had seen in a generation. The plot that had been called the Barrens got a new name on every traveler's lips. Whitlock's Well. She never sold the water, not one cup. But a trade grew up around it on its own. A family might leave a sack of flour, a rancher a side of bacon asking to fill a few barrels for thirsty cattle, and she always said yes. Because her father had hoarded his river in silence for 20 years, and it had cost him everything, and she would not make his mistake. She made Silas Penn a partner, put his name on the deed beside her own, gave him back the thing the Thorns had stolen 40 years before. His name, his good, honest name. He came out most evenings now, sat on her new porch, the one she'd built with her own hands, and the 2 of them watched the sun go down over the green where there had only ever been gray. An old man and a young woman, the last 2 who spoke the language of the stone. Cassius Thorne sold his ranch within the year and left the valley. But before he went, he sent a single barrel back to the well with a note, 2 words, "I'm sorry." And Adelaide, who could have done 100 things with that, simply filled the barrel and sent it back full, because a hard heart is just a frightened one. And she had decided somewhere in all of this that she would not become what had nearly destroyed her father. The final evening unfolds at golden hour. Adelaide sat on her porch steps, a worn leather harness in her lap, needle and all moving in a slow-practiced rhythm. Dusty grazed nearby, coat sleek and healthy now, a living testament to good water and gentle hands. A wagon appeared on the horizon, crawling slow. A common sight now. A young family. Faces worn from a long road. The father climbed down, twisting his hat in his hands. "Ma'am," his voice hesitant, "we heard, in the last town, a story about this place." He swallowed. Is this the place with the water?" Adelaide looked up from her work. She looked past him, at his wife on the wagon seat, a small child in her arms, at the vast desert stretching out behind them, the same land that had once seemed so empty, so cruel, so full of nothing. She didn't see it that way anymore. She saw the hidden lines, the secret patterns, the deep sleeping river that fed it all. She saw a world not of scarcity, but of secret promise, waiting for anyone with the patience to listen. She set down the harness, and she smiled, small and genuine, and carrying the weight of everything she had learned. "This is the place," she said. She stood, brushed the leather scraps from her apron. "My father didn't leave me land," she told him, walking with him toward the well. "He left me a language, and he taught me how to listen for it." The sun sank low and gentle behind the far mountains, spilling soft gold and amber across the basin, and it bathed the small green homestead in a warm, forgiving light. Down in the dark, far below the earth that everyone had called worthless, the river ran on, awake now, and shared, and singing the quiet song her father always swore was there.